morning and welcome once again to St. Teresa's Church. I'll be your master of ceremonies. My name is John Gill. Good morning. Thanks for braving the cold and joining us once again. For our welcome and opening prayer, Father Daniel Keith.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the 33rd annual breakfast for Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We'll begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we gather here this morning to remember and honor the life of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for his efforts in promoting and protecting civil rights and racial justice for all people. We thank you, Father, for his example of courage, persistence, and sacrifice in his struggle to bring the gospel values of peace and unity into our world and into our lives. May all of us be inspired to continue that work. We ask you to bless this food we share, to bless those who provide and prepare it, and to bless all those who go without. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Enjoy it.
We have and it's an honor for me this morning to read a special passage. A guiding light of our Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Breakfast Committee was lost to us this year. Betty Ann Trapasso was among the most dedicated, tolerant, and compassionate persons in our Branford community. She, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., stood for justice and inclusion and worked tirelessly for both. A little of her history would include lifelong dedication to St. Mary's Church, its parish council, and school board. She volunteered for the Midnight Run and 31 years at the community dining room. She was part of the MLK Breakfast Committee for at least 30 years, not only planning, purchasing, raising funds, and organizing ticket sales. Every year she was in the kitchen cooking the sausage on the day of the breakfast. She was part of the fabric of Branford, a daughter and a granddaughter of its first selectman. When asked for their memories of her, breakfast committee members said, Betty Ann was always a dedicated, hard worker who could be counted on. She seemed to have no prejudices against any person or group. She was accepting of everyone she came in contact with and was cheerful to all. Betty Ann could not tolerate any kind of injustice and would give her all to overcome it. She was particularly dedicated to helping the poor and disenfranchised, following in the footsteps of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. She is greatly missed by all of us. Now for our responsibility, Reverend Leroy Perry.
In every era, men and women have been called to serve God in profound ways. Such a servant of the Lord was Martin Luther King Jr., whose life we commemorate today. We not only commemorate the life of Martin Luther King Jr., but we use him as a model for the way we should all be committed to freedom, justice, and care for all peoples of the earth. We are thankful for this 20th century prophet, Martin Luther King Jr., who joined the prophets of history in their cry, in the name of freedom, let my people go.
Martin Martin Luther King Jr. envisioned the ultimate freedom, the freedom achieved in struggle, the freedom reached in sisterhood and brotherhood, the freedom fired by the dream of a man, the freedom inspired by the love of people, the freedom free of hate, the freedom full of love.
In the name of this freedom of love, let our people love.
We remember the conviction of Martin Luther King Jr. that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed.
Let us pray for courage and determination by those who are oppressed in all parts of the world.
We remember Martin's insight that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one person directly affects all people indirectly.
Let us pray that we see nothing in isolation, but may know ourselves bound to one another and to all people under heaven.
We remember Martin's lament that we are often weak, with ineffectual voices, with an uncertain sound. We often support the status quo and are silently sanctioning things as they are.
Let us pray that we are never silent in the face of wrong, but that we can be disturbers of the status quo when that is God's call to us.
We remember Martin's hope that dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched community, and in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of brotherhood and sisterhood will shine over our great nation with sparkling beauty.
Therefore, in faith, let us commend ourselves and our work for justice to the goodness of our Almighty God. Amen.
With all due respect to any speaker we've ever had here, the best part of the program's coming up. The director of music makers, Branford High School music makers, are about to do a selection for it. Before I get in trouble with my aunt, the cookies that are being served today were created and prepared by Mindy's Bakers, culinary arts program at Branford High. They are meant to commemorate King's message of unity in diversity. So every time you take a bite out of one of those cookies, you remember where they came from. You all set? You don't need a microphone?
I was just
Only a witness for my Lord. Only a witness for my Lord. Who will be a witness for my Lord? Who will be a witness for my Lord?
I'll be a witness for my Lord. 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 There was a man of the Pharisees. His name was Nicodemus, and he did believe.
somebody tells me, well, don't let them go from here or don't let them go from they didn't give me anything. So, the lady in a blue shirt, all the way back there, raise your hand. You got glasses on. Come on up, you're going to be first in line. Well, you didn't get me in time, so she's going to be first in line because she's furthest from it. And now they're going to take over. Sorry about that. advise me, should we continue on with the program or should we wait until everyone's eating? All right, we're going to continue on. I think there are people that have places to go, things to do, people to see. When I came in this morning and was advised that Senator Kennedy would be our speaker, I was told there was a bio that I had received. And in all of this modern technology, I didn't receive such bio. And so I said to Mr. Kennedy, I said, Mr. Kennedy, how would you like to be introduced? And then I said to myself, God, he's done everything around here. And he's supported everything that goes on, especially in Branford and the state of Connecticut. I really don't think you need me up here to read something about Mr. Kennedy. I think he needs He's truly a man who doesn't need an introduction. Senator Kennedy.
Good morning, everybody. Wow. What a great turnout that we have here at St. Therese Church. John, thank you so much for being the MC this morning. John asked me, Ted, can we just go ahead? We're having a little backup in the kitchen. I know that people are still eating. Would you mind proceeding with your remarks? And I said to John, listen, John, I come from a big family. And whenever I sit down for a meal, people are always getting up, waiting for food, trying to get a word in edgewise. So you know what? I feel like I'm right at home. I want to thank the entire organizing committee for this Martin Luther King breakfast, namely Mary Ann and Phoebe, our co-chairs. Please give them. Can everybody hear me okay? It is such an honor for me to be asked to be your special speaker here at the 33rd annual Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. annual breakfast. And we're all here today, obviously, to honor the life and the legacy of Dr. King, to pay tribute to our nation's foremost civil rights leader, and to reflect on the ways that his teachings have meaning in our lives today. Now, I have promised my friend Eunice LaSala and the organizers that I wasn't going to make a political speech here today. And I know that we're in a Catholic church, but it is very difficult, if not impossible, to have an honest discussion about the legacy of Martin Luther King in 2018 without acknowledging the angry rhetoric and policies that are being advanced by many of our country's leaders, including the President of the United States. Now, I think you know where I'm coming from. We have a lot more work to do in the United States to realize the dream of Martin Luther King. And that's why it's so important that all of us are here today in Branford at St. Therese Church to remember and to recommit ourselves to racial equality and social justice for everyone. And I'm very proud to be here, a part of this incredible community. So I've been asked to talk about the legacy of Martin Luther King and what that legacy means to me in the work that I do. Many of you know that I have spent about the last 30 years of my life working in the disability rights movement, the civil rights movement for people with disabilities. And that is a direct outgrowth of the dreams, the goals, and philosophies of Martin Luther King. And I'm here this morning to talk to you a little bit about that work and why that's a natural extension of the work that was started by Martin Luther King so many years ago. So we'll explore for a few moments the nature of discrimination against people with disabilities. What form does it take? How is it expressed? What can we do about it? And in what ways is the struggle for disability rights? In what ways does that mirror the philosophy, goals, and tactics of Dr. King's civil rights movement of the 60s? Simply said, the disability rights movement is based on the very simple premise that people with disabilities should be afforded the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. To dismantle the physical barriers, that exist, the curbs and the buildings that are inaccessible, to create equal opportunity in the workforce and education and housing, to live independently and end institutionalization for people with disabilities, so that everyone can become integrated in our community life. That is essentially the philosophy, and as you can see, the isolation that has taken place in our country's history is very reflective on the separateness and the isolation that Dr. King talked about many, many years ago. It's based on the concept of independent living. And I'm looking in the crowd today, and I see so many people who are working in our community to make sure that people with disabilities, our frail seniors and elders, can live independently, make decisions for themselves for as long as possible before facing the option of going into a more institutionalized setting. That's really what we're talking about here, is allowing people the opportunity to make choices for themselves in the community that they want to live in. You know, we grew up, and I see a lot of folks here who are of my generation, or maybe a little older. We grew up with the idea of disability, as people with disability, as being objects of charity. We felt sorry for people with disabilities. And that was part of the fundraising appeals for very different organizations, depicting kind of poor, helpless, innocent people with disabilities and asking for your money. The simple message today is that people with disabilities do not want pity. They don't want your money. They want an equal opportunity and chance to pursue the American dream. And I'm pleased to see a growing group consciousness among people with disabilities. Dr. King talked about this group consciousness. He said that without a group consciousness and understanding, there can be no success in the political struggle. And what we've seen in whether somebody uses a wheelchair or has a visual impairment or a hearing impairment or other type of mobility impairment, mental health condition, if you ask people, and the Harris Polling Organization has polled people with disabilities across the country over many, many years, and people feel a sense of kinship and camaraderie, even though their disability might not have anything to do with another person's condition. Because of our common experience. And one of the things that Dr. King told us is to be proud of who we are. Proud of who we are. Because for many years, many people were trying to hide their disabilities and were ashamed of their disabilities. And many parents, not all, but many parents wouldn't talk about their children with disabilities. And Dr. King said, let us be proud of who we are, and so too it is. I think it's fantastic that people with disabilities today are not trying to hide who they are. In fact, they're accepting and they're celebrating our uniqueness. And I think that is a fantastic thing. Even those of you who were able many years ago to attend the World Special Olympics Summer Games in New Haven, the world came to New Haven in 1995. And there were parents in the crowds with T-shirts on saying, "I'm the parent of a Special Olympian." They were boasting about it. They were bragging about it. And so when people ask me, have we made progress? The answer is definitely yes, but we have much more work to do. I know, some of you may know my own personal story. I was 12 years old when I was diagnosed with bone cancer in my leg. And I remember my dad coming into my hospital room and telling me that the doctors were going to have to remove part of my leg. And I thought what he meant was the doctors were simply going to have to carve out like the swollen part right below my knee. And he said, well, not exactly. He said, from the knee down. And I remember how shocked and horrified I was about that. that. And all these thoughts racing through my mind about how my life was over. Because you see, I too had a bias and stereotype about disability and what people could and couldn't do. And I remember I was very ashamed of my physical appearance. I had very low self-esteem. In 7th grade, you can imagine, you know, a pimple on your cheek is a catastrophe when you're in 7th grade. And to me, my leg looked deformed and scarred and purple and disgusting. I couldn't imagine any girl possibly wanting to go out on a date with me. I thought, I remember I would, in swim class, I would wait till all the other kids would change and go into the pool because I did not want to remove my artificial leg in front of the other kids. And it took me a long time to really celebrate and come to terms with who I am, to like myself exactly who I am. And I think that that is one of the messages that Martin Luther King really helped us understand, that we need to own up to who we are, celebrate our uniqueness, and be proud of that. You know, the history of disability in our country has, as I mentioned before, been one of social isolation. For years and years, people, if you had a disability in the United States of America, you were removed from your community. You were sent by doctor's orders, primarily. You were sent to large institutions. We still have some of them. Thank God we've gotten rid of most of the institutional care, but we still have vestiges. For example, Southbury Training School here in our state, that were systematically isolated people with disabilities, took them out of the community. Well, how are we trying to change public awareness and public attitude when we can't even see people with disabilities and treat it in a very dehumanizing way? Some of you may remember when my Uncle Bobby was senator from the state of New York, he paid a surprise visit on a place called Willowbrook. Willowbrook was a state hospital on Staten Island that housed almost 7,000 people with disabilities in incredible and barracks-like conditions that were very dehumanizing. They bathed people by stripping everyone down and lining them up against the wall and hosing them down. That was considered okay in 1965. And of this protective isolation model. Community integration was never a goal. And it was that people expected little from themselves. Parents did not expect a lot from their children with disabilities. People with disabilities did not have role models, did not see themselves as being productive or contributing to our community or becoming professionals in our world. And Dr. King told us all in the civil rights movement that we need to aim higher. That we need to aim higher. And not just see ourselves in the same old routine. And to aspire for a higher calling. And that is exactly what has happened in the disability community because we all need mentors. We all need mentors. And in the 1960s, it was the handful of African Americans who were able to achieve success in the courtroom or in the corporation that really paved the way for a whole new generations behind them. And the same is true in the women's movement that piggybacked off of the civil rights movement and the LGBT movement that piggybacked off of the women's movement, where we are trying to expand opportunities for all people who have been left out of the mainstream. So, but even today, the people with disabilities are still 4 times more likely to live in poverty and much more likely to drop out of high school and much more likely to be deprived of basic life choices. So I was very proud to have worked in this area for over, as I said, over 30 years. And I can remember back in 1990, I was in the Rose Garden watching President Bush sign the Americans with Disabilities Act, which in my view is the greatest civil rights document ever codified. It is the first comprehensive declaration of equality for people with disabilities. And you know what? We did it in a bipartisan way. We did it in a bipartisan way. To say that I don't believe that the Americans with Disabilities Act could pass today in Congress. We would never, ever be able to pass this law today that had such sweeping a mandate for public services, restaurants, movie theaters, employment, schools, etc. We just wouldn't be able to do that. But I just want to say the preamble of the Americans with Disabilities Act is something I think is important to understand. The preamble sets forth the aspirations for what we're trying to accomplish with civil rights legislation. In the preamble of the ADA, it says that society's discrimination against people with disabilities is a grave and pervasive social problem, persisting in such areas as employment, transportation, and access to public services. It also says that people with disabilities represent a discrete and insular minority, relegated to a position of political powerlessness based on characteristics beyond their control. Now, if some of this language rings familiar with people, it's because that's exactly what it was intended to do. These words are lifted practically word for word from the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And what's most important in my mind is it says that it's not a person's physical or mental condition that creates the handicap. It says society's discrimination against people with disabilities is the problem. It's not somebody's physical or mental condition that creates the problem. What is it? It's our outdated ideas, prejudices, and stereotypes about people with disabilities that creates the true barrier. That's what Congress said. It also said that it's, again, a discrete and insular minority. This was a novel concept. The idea that people with disabilities were a minority group. And just like other disenfranchised political groups in the United States. And it really codified, again, the rights-based approach as opposed to the charity-based approach. And in the work that I'm doing today, up at the state and nationwide, we're always begging for dollars. I see Pat Bourne here, for example, who has spent her life advocating for home and community-based care for people with intellectual disabilities here in our community. And she and her board have to go up to Hartford every single year and beg for dollars so that people can live independently in their community. That's what it's I espouse a rights-based approach. When people are being denied their opportunity to live in the community, it's not about money. It's about their fairness, and it's about their civil rights to live and make decisions for themselves in our community. And that's the way I think we need to. Today, in addition to working as a healthcare lawyer and serving as your state senator in Hartford, I also chair an organization, national organization called the American Association of People with Disabilities. I've been on their board for about 15 years, and last June, I decided to chair this organization because of the recent harmful changes that have taken place in our nation's capital, that are taking a wrecking ball to the 30 years of bipartisan progress that we've been able to make in the area of disability rights. I cannot stand by and watch 30 years of my work go get demolished in a short period of time. And this organization, if you're involved in the area of disability rights, I invite you to visit our website, aapd.com. Learn about what we are is the umbrella group of all the different disability organizations nationwide. So, for example, there's the Federation for the Blind, there's the ARC, there's United Cerebral Palsy, there's Autism Speaks. There are many, many great disability organizations out there that are doing advocacy work. But this organization is the umbrella organization. We're the foremost civil rights and public policy organization representing the whole cohort of people with disabilities across our country. We intervene in cases, test cases around the United States, trying to effectuate good public policy when it comes to disability rights. And I went to law school because I wanted to help people. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. You know, some of you have heard me, tell my story about when I was in getting my treatment for the cancer. I was up in the Jimmy Fund in Boston. You know, the Red Sox support this organization called the Jimmy Fund, which is the principal experimental Vanguard treatment unit for kids with cancer. It also has the highest mortality rate of any ward at Boston Children's Hospital. But I was in the Jimmy Fund. That's where I was. And I'm grateful for every single day for the treatment that I received there. But I remember, because I went there for treatment every few weeks, and there was another boy who also lost his leg from bone cancer. And I would see him, and he didn't wear an artificial leg. And I asked him, I said, I'm curious, why don't you wear an artificial leg? Knowing that for many people, it's just too painful to wear an artificial leg. And he said to me, I would love to wear an artificial leg, but my parents can't afford one. And I remember that story because I all of a sudden felt like so guilty. I felt like so, for my good fortune, for my parents' ability to be able to buy me an artificial leg. And I said to myself at that time, you know what, when I grow up, I want to make sure that this doesn't happen to other people. And really, I'm so fortunate in many ways that the defining moment of my life happened to me when I was 12 years old, because I have a mission in my life, and all of us need to have missions in our lives. There's one of the signature issues that I'm working on, that I'll just tell you briefly about, and I'm spearheading, is an initiative called the Disability Equality Index. The Disability Equality Index is a project of AAPD, the organization I just told you about. And what we're doing now, it's now become the leading corporate benchmarking tool for disability equality and inclusion. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to, again, piggyback off the success that other disenfranchised groups have followed. And like the Human Rights Watch has an index, and other groups have an index where they monitor the board of directors, how many people of color, how many women do you have on your corporate board, what are your diversity policies, what are you doing to expand job opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So what did we do? We created our own index. And I'm pleased to say now that I'm working with almost 200 companies, over 75 companies in the Fortune 500. And we are working to try to, first of all, recognize the companies that are doing a really good job. And there are. If you go to disabilityequalityindex.org, you can see the best places to work for people with disabilities, the best companies for disability inclusion in America, we grade. And I'm very pleased to say that, that since last year, we now have two gigantic companies, namely Fidelity and Vanguard. And if you don't know those companies, you know that they are between those two companies are the largest holders of securities, of stock in the United States of America. And just a few weeks ago, they signed on to help us roll out the Disability Equality Index and really help hold corporations accountable for their actions in the area of disability policy. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. But I think when I think that in addition to working on the Disability Equality Index, I'm also trying to ensure that mental health parity is being implemented here in the United States, because I think that that's the kind of society that Martin Luther King would dream of. It's not just about racial equality, it's about creating a world where inclusion and equality are there for every single person. When my uncle became president, he challenged all of us, he challenged all Americans to fight for fairness and to serve others rather than themselves. And it's interesting reflecting on the work of Martin Luther King, because my father and his brothers were his political contemporaries, and they lived in the same and had to deal with many of the same turbulent issues of that time. In fact, in 1983, my father was the lead Senate sponsor for the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. We think today, well, of course, we're going to create a national holiday to honor the foremost civil rights leader in America's history. Of course. But go and Google history of the Martin Luther King holiday, and you will see this was far from an easy thing to accomplish. There were many, many people who did not want to honor Dr. Martin Luther King with a national holiday. Okay, so again, we're here for the 33rd annual day, but I think it's also important. There's a lot of high school students and a lot of young people here in the room. We have to remember that a lot of Dr. King's ideas were threatening to people, even only in 1983, where finally a national holiday was created in his honor. And so we have to remember, why were his ideas so threatening in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s? I think it's an important history lesson for our young people today. But my family, we obviously grew up as part of this whole effort, and I think that a final thought about my uncle and my dad, both my uncles and my dad, why were they so committed to the area of civil rights? Why? I think, and this is just my own thought, that they were deeply influenced and shaped by their relationship with their sister, my aunt Rosemary, who was born with intellectual disabilities. And because they witnessed firsthand how differently she was treated and how she was ignored and excluded. They understood firsthand the pain that millions of families feel as they watch a sibling struggle for social acceptance, or a parent search in vain for an educational program or a job opportunity to promote independence. I think that, so I was brought up to become that society has so much to gain from inclusion and integration, and that we all have a civic duty to get involved in our communities, and that we can't leave these problems for other people to try to solve. So the theme for this morning's breakfast is a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King that reads, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. So let us leave here in this incredible breakfast today, and I am really uplifted and feel the power of positive energy coming from every single person in this room. Because Martin Luther King taught us that each person can make a difference, and that each of us must try. We cannot be silent about the critical issues of our day. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Sorry about that. I wasn't checking my phone. Remarks and benediction. Reverend Dr. Lee Barker.
Y'all gonna sing We Shall Overcome? No, I was just getting some direction from the music director. You know, I think it's phenomenal that we could meet here at 8:30 and in an hour and a half get the sermon, take up the collection, and just fellowship together. I mean, just seeing the size of this crowd is phenomenal. And I personally feel gratified in just seeing all of you here today. And the message of Senator Kennedy was not only inspiring, but informative And it gave me another look at what the dream was all about. Langston Hughes said, whatever happened to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or surf over like a syrupy sweet and just run? They killed the dreamer. And they said, now let's see what becomes of the dream. And I'm just so glad this morning that we have kept the dream alive. And we are dream believers. That means we believe in the dream. We are dream keepers. That means we're not going to let the dream go. And we are dream doers, because that's what the dream is all about. Not just having the dream, but keeping the dream alive and being doers of the word. Amen? Amen. So let us try to sing We Shall Overcome. They're going to start it. Thank God. I don't have to. Before you do that, let's thank the Martin Luther King Committee. Give them a hand. The wait staff and the kitchen for the food. Our speaker one more time. Our choir. Oh, yes, let's do We Shall Overcome. We'll do the other one, the anthem. Oh, you want to do it now?